the employment policies and employment area conversions, an overview of the Indigenous planning perspectives, and an overview as well of the draft official plan vision statement and directions and principles. As you will see on the agenda, there is time for questions and discussion between each section. Then we will share next steps and wrap up the meeting by 8 p.m. tonight. Next slide. So a few introductions of who is in the meeting tonight. We are joined today by those who are leading the official plan from the city, including Jeff Cantos. And I'll now ask him to introduce the city team.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. Again, as Kristen said, my name is Jeff Cantos. I'm the manager of the city's official plan team, and I'm joined tonight with a slew of city staff, some from the official plan team, Jenny Maidrin, Jason Sang, Caroline Buxbaum, members of the Major Transit Station Area team, Josh Wise, Malcolm Duncan, our colleague Candice Valente from Economic Development and Culture group to help us with the employment policies, and Philip Parker, who's working on expanding housing options in neighborhoods initiative. And members of my team, of the city team, will be very active on the chat. So if you have questions, there'll be different options for you to answer, either through the chat or when it's question and answer time, Kristen can facilitate us. Okay, over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So I just also want to introduce with me from Dillon Consulting, we have Nicole Bugley and Ish Chowdhury, and they will be helping manage the meeting behind the scenes, including taking meeting minutes of this evening. I would also love to welcome participants to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know who is joining us this evening, and you can also get to know each other. Next slide. So just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. When you're talking, comment, please use the raise function, or you can also type a question into the chat, as Jeff has mentioned. So there will be dedicated points for discussion. I want you to please ask your question. So as you may have noticed, the meeting is being recorded today, but we will only post online the presentation component of this meeting. The comments and question and discussion that happens here tonight with participants will only be used for note-taking purposes. So a little bit on my role as meeting facilitator for tonight. So my job is to manage the discussion and make sure everyone gets a chance to be heard. To ensure everyone's able to participate, we do ask that you think about and raise the question that you most want answered. We do strongly suggest one question per person at a time, and you will be held accountable to that. So if you don't get your question answered live here tonight, there will be the Q&A in our engagement records. Next slide. So some guidelines for this evening. So again, we welcome your discussion and questions from you. There are no bad questions. Chances are, if you're thinking it and want to ask it, other people on the call are also thinking the same question. And we want to hear from everybody. We do believe that everyone has wisdom and experience to share. On that note, as with any large group, there will be differences in opinion. So please be respectful and listen. The city is here today primarily to listen to your feedback, your thoughts, your perspectives, and answer your questions. So please don't be shy. Next slide. So a little bit on the chat function, as Jeff and I have both mentioned, it is going to be active and we encourage discussion there. It will be available throughout the meeting. The city team will be monitoring and will try to respond to questions when they can. Just a reminder to be respectful in the chat. We do want to keep it active, but if there are disrespectful or abusive comments, we will have to close the chat. Next slide. So meeting purpose, why are we here tonight? So city staff are going to provide an overview of the draft employment policies, the major transit station area delineations, and the draft vision and directions. We want to hear your feedback. So again, we're going to open it up for key points for question and dialogue. Then we're going to share next steps with you and how you can continue to be engaged. Next slide. So this slide here, it provides a quick snapshot of the project process. The project initially launched in May of last year, and we've gone through parts 1, the vision and priorities, and part 2, the asking big questions, setting policy directions. During that time, the city and our Dillon engagement team were doing a lot of listening through public meetings like this, through youth engagement, online engagement and surveys, meetings with Indigenous rights holders and organizations, and through a community leader circle. Now we're at the point here in part 3 where the city has created draft policies, and we are continuing to meet with people and organizations to discuss our Plan Toronto. So far in part 3, we have held meetings again on the draft environment and climate change policies, which went to the Planning and Housing Committee yesterday and will be followed by City Council on June 15th. Now we are hosting a series of public meetings on the other draft official plan policies, which will be leading to a report to Planning and Housing Committee on July 5th. We're also going to share, and you may have seen them on social media, on the website, some other upcoming dates for you that you are welcome to join us for further conversation, and we'll share those dates at the end of the presentation tonight. So next slide. So this is a bit of an overview of what has taken place so far for the engagement. In part 1 and part 2, and so far in part 3, we have held over 60 meetings and met with over 2,000 people. That's been including various internal and external stakeholders, organizations, businesses, and residents. And this work has included a focus on reaching underrepresented populations and the groups that work with them, including Indigenous rights holders and organizations, youth and that was done through schools and school boards, seniors through the Seniors Roundtable. And we've had some focused conversations with key groups like around accessibility and specific geographies like in Scarborough. We also had an online component of the engagement. The Our Plan website and the Our Story Maps, which is kind of like our online resource that you can explore information, maps, and data related to Our Plan Toronto, they have received over 10,000 visits. Next slide. So here is just a snapshot of all the input we've received to date, and our team has worked to put all of the input into some key themes. So we have the cross-cutting themes on the left there, and these are themes that came forward in every meeting across different organizations and groups with Indigenous communities and organizations. And what emerged was a few things, but one theme was a key focus on equity, inclusion, and relationship building. And that includes addressing inequities across the city, be more inclusive, reflect the diversity of the city, require universal and accessible design. Community-led solutions was another theme, and that was working collaboratively with communities, especially when it came to big change in neighborhoods like big development, learning from the past and implementation. And that spoke to understanding the history of communities and community issues. Another theme was aligning priorities and conversations. So getting everyone on the same page, and that also included alignment with leadership. The other themes in the darker green on your right, those were themes that were the most frequently discussed issues. So things like housing affordability, the scale of intensification. So, and that included the need to balance development with infrastructure like green space and transit. Environment and climate change. So that was what we were meeting about in April. And some of the highlights in that theme were a plan to get to net zero, promote active transit, protecting green space and trees. Jobs, so that was another theme, and that was particularly heightened in COVID. Safety and complete communities, where every neighborhood needed a complete communities approach, and they needed to have universal design so people don't age out. So go to the next slide. So now we're just going to have what we're calling an engagement moment. We are going to be doing some polling and ask questions throughout the meeting tonight. So we'll go to the next slide with the instructions. So I'm going to ask you to visit a website, and you can do that through your smartphone or through your desktop computer. and you'll go to www.menti.com. So you can see the web address on the screen there, and also my colleague Ish has put it in the chat. So you can go there, go to menti.com, and once you're there, you will enter the code 5339203. Or you can just scan the QR code that's on your screen with your smartphone camera app. And then there'll be a link, so click on that link when you do get prompted. So again, it's menti.com, and the code is 5339203. Okay, so I see lots of people are already participating. That's great. And not surprisingly, many of you, or most of you, are here tonight from Toronto, East York area. And that, I mean, this meeting is specific to that area, so that makes sense. And we have one from North York. Okay, see if anyone else is logging in there. Okay, looks like we've slowed down a little bit, so we'll go to our next question. So this is a question if you have participated in some of the other our planned Toronto engagement activities. I outlined a bunch of things that we've been doing over the past year and a half. So just asking if you have participated in any of those events or activities. So many of you have said no. So this might be your first meeting, your first time learning about our Plan Toronto. So thanks so much for being here. And many of you have also attended in the past or participated in some way in the past. So welcome back. But this gives us a really good idea of kind of the base level of knowledge that our participants have. So thank you. Next question. So this is for those who did say yes, that they have participated in our Plan Toronto engagement activities previously. So if you did, how did you previously participate? So there's a few options there, and you can click all that apply. So attended a citywide virtual meetings like the one tonight, attended other virtual meetings, that could have been a stakeholder meeting. You could have completed an online survey, a member of our community leaders circle, and we have one welcome tonight. 5 of you have visited the website or participated in, and a couple of you have visited one of our story maps. Okay. Great. We'll go to our next question. This is a question just again to kind of understand the base level of knowledge of the group tonight. So how familiar are you with the Toronto official plan? So we have some options here: not at all, slightly, moderately, very, and extremely. So most so far are moderately familiar with the Toronto official plan. With some of you very, a couple slightly, and some of you not at all. And for those of you who are on the not at all, slightly side of things, Jeff will be doing a presentation shortly on the kind of highlights and overview of the official plan. So you will get to learn a little bit about that tonight. Okay, next slide, or next question. And this is for those who do currently maybe use the Toronto official plan. It's how do you currently use it? Do you use it as a resident, as a member of a group or organization, for work, as a student for your school, other and not sure? So I can see many people use it as a resident and a member of a group, and some for school. Okay, so I am going to ask that you leave Mentimeter open this evening because we are going to have key moments. I'll ask some other questions, and we will have some other live polling. We're going to have questions to get your feedback on some things we're going to be presenting. We're going to see how familiar you are with the project like we just did. And some are just testing if you're paying attention. So thank you for participating, and we will continue with the presentation now. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to provide that official plan refresher.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Again, thanks everyone for joining and welcome. And I just wanted to acknowledge that it's June 1st, so it's the kickoff to Pride Month. So for those who celebrate, it's Happy Pride Month. So based on the quick polls that we were doing, I'm going to take you through a bit of a official plan refresher. Next slide, please. So the city of Toronto on the right is nestled in a larger region, which is nestled in to the province. So our population is about almost 2.8 million as of last year, and we're nestled into what's known as the Greater Golden Horseshoe. That has a population of over 10 million. And within the Greater Golden Horseshoe are our surrounding municipalities, for instance, the region of York, region of Durham, and it reaches as far as Niagara region and the county of Peterborough further east. And again, we are nestled into the province of Ontario, which the population is 14.7 million. Next slide, please. And so just like that, just like we're nestled into in geography based, we're also, the city's also, the official plan is nestled into a policy-led planning system within which we work. So in Ontario, the overarching planning direction comes from the province through the Planning Act, what's known as the Provincial Policy Statement, and those kind of matters of provincial interest are implemented through regional and local plans. So kind of the next tier down in terms of regional planning, the province sets out what's called the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and you may have heard about the Greenbelt plan. And further down is what we're here talking about today, is the city's official plan that provides the citywide vision for future growth. And nestled within the official plan are what are called secondary plans, local area that are precipitated by local area studies, and sometimes precinct plans. And again, filtered there through area-specific implementation, there are zoning bylaws, and all the way down to the very, very site-specific zoning bylaw standards, kind of the height of the building, within the zoning bylaws, the number of parking spaces, etc. Okay, next slide, please. So the official plan is, again, nestled there in the middle in that image, is the city planning document that acts as Toronto's roadmap for land use matters. It sets out our long-term vision, shared values, policies that help guide decision-making on land development, economic growth, the environment, and more. And so it's important that the official plan direct where different types of development and growth should and should not go. So what this process is, the official, our Plan Toronto process is intended to do is provincially mandated review of the official plan. And so the province requires municipalities within the Greater Golden Horseshoe area that Toronto is nestled into is to regularly, about every 5 years, review our official plans to make sure that it conforms to provincial plans and that we don't conflict with it. So we here in Toronto have called our process our Plan Toronto, and we've embarked upon it for the last almost 2 years, basically all virtual, and this meeting is just the next milestone. And the province also sets out minimum population and employment targets for each municipality in the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, that municipalities are required to demonstrate that we have a plan to accommodate these minimum population and employment forecasts. So for Toronto, the minimum target is an additional minimum 700,000 people and a minimum 450,000 jobs. So that's called the conformity exercise. So that's what we're undertaking as part of our Plan Toronto. Next slide, please. This slide really quickly demonstrates that our official plan is broken into a number of chapters that have different policies within them. And the biggest gear at the bottom, the land use designations, correspond to the land use designation map at the bottom right. And so those the land use designation map on the right have associated policies in Chapter 4. And in the next slide, when you break down the city into 100 blocks, you'll see that the land use designation neighborhoods accounts for about 35% of the city's landmass. Roads account for about 19% there at the top that we don't ascribe land use designations to. And at the bottom, the designations that are attributed to growth, so mixed use areas, about 5%, and those designations related to employment growth, there's about 13% that account for what are called core employment areas and general employment areas. And that'll be another section of a presentation a little bit later this evening. Okay, over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And we are going to go back to our Mentimeter questions. And so this is a question, just a test that you were paying attention to Jeff's presentation there. So you can select all that apply. The official plan is. So is it a roadmap for planning in Toronto? Does it set the long-term vision for the city? Direct where development should go? Provide the building blocks for complete communities? Or all of the above? Okay, so we have responses still rolling in here, but most of you choosing all of the above. So Janet, you just asked if you get the QR code again. You can access Mentimeter by going to menti.com, and there's the code. It's in the chat now. So the code is 5339203. So 18 of you have said all of the above, and that is the correct answer. I mean, technically all of these are correct. So well done, everybody, for paying attention. Okay, so we will, and I'll hand it over to Josh to present the section on major transit station areas and protected major transit station areas.
Great, thanks, Kristen. You can hear me through? Yeah, great. Hopefully everybody can't hear the shrieking child in the background who doesn't want to take a bath tonight, but I think it's just on my end. I'll try to ignore it as best I can. So speaking to major transit station areas and protected major transit station areas, this is one of the major components of the intensification strategy element of the official plan review and the municipal comprehensive review. This is a key requirement of the growth plan, so that we need to demonstrate conformity with the updated growth plan. And in order to do that, we need to delineate, so draw boundaries around all transit stations that are either subway stations or are identified in the growth plan as a, quote, priority transit corridor. So you can go to the next slide. Oh no, you're already there, sorry. So across the city, we have about 140 major transit station areas. So this is every subway station, LRT stations, and GO rail stations, as I mentioned, as they're identified in the growth plan. And it's for future, existing and future stations. So major transit station area, this delineated area, a radius around every station, and that top right graphic kind of illustrates what we're talking about. It's about a 10-minute walk from to any transit station, so about 500 to 800 meters away. 10-minute walk if you can open the door of your house, of your school, workplace, community center, anything, and get to the main entrance of a subway station, LRT or GO station. That area is more than likely going to be delineated through our GIS analysis as part of the major transit station area for a local station. So the growth plan requires that municipalities have a planning framework within that radius, within that delineated area, that supports the growth plan's targets. And the growth plan lays out different targets for subway stations, LRT stations, and GO rail stations that are all intended to have a higher density, minimum framework density that will allow more intensification and more people and more jobs close to those transit stations in order to maximize that infrastructure, improve walkability, support different environmental outcomes, as well as outcomes related to having more complete communities. It's important to note that these density targets that are set in the growth plan and that we are putting in our major transit station area policies are just minimums. So these are the floor, and we need to demonstrate that we can meet at the very least this. There will be many individual developments, local area studies, secondary plans that will go above these minimum targets that are being set out through this policy. So this policy is certainly not the end of the road, but is kind of that floor and something that we build off of in order to ensure we have intensification and density near transit. So the next slide. So this map shows the stations that we currently, that the city has currently delineated and brought forward to Planning and Housing Committee for the basis of consultation. So in the downtown, we have finalized 16 stations. Those have gone through council and they've gone to the minister and are awaiting approval. We have 3 other stations that have gone through council approval. And there are about 115 or so stations that we are currently consulting on, and through this process, we're looking to get feedback on. So it is, you can see kind of the swath of stations. It covers every single ward in the city. It goes in all corners, and it has been a fairly large undertaking in order to delineate these stations and identify the minimum planned density at all of them. I'll go to the next slide. So a subset of our major transit station areas are something that are termed protected major transit station areas. And this is the tool that the province allows municipalities to unlock inclusionary zoning. So last fall, the inclusionary zoning bylaw was passed by council and adopted by council. So that was the first step in ensuring that inclusionary zoning and affordable housing will be part of certain new developments. The second, and just as important piece, logistically speaking, is identifying and delineating protected major transit station areas. And so that's what that's a major component of what we're doing through this exercise. The map on the screen shows 3 shades of blue. That was the analysis done through the inclusionary zoning bylaw that looked at land where land values were able to support inclusionary zoning. This was again adopted by council. A version of this map now lives in the official plan. And what we've done is we've taken every place where there is an overlap between one of those 3 shades of blue, one of the market areas that support inclusionary zoning, and a major transit station area. Wherever there's an overlap, those are the yellow dots you see on the screen. Those we're identifying as protected major transit station areas. And that's what we've brought forward to committee, at least in draft form to date. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this is part of kind of a broader 2-step growth management project. That green, that little chart at the bottom right, you can see the highlighted green text. That's what we're dealing with today, ensuring that we are meeting growth plan requirements, because that is a requirement that the city has to meet our growth plan requirements. We need to make sure that we have a planning framework and we can demonstrate that planning framework at all of our major transit station areas meet these minimum density requirements. And then moving forward, or in certain areas, we will see increases to that minimum planned density. We know the ones that we've brought forward across the downtown far exceed the minimum density in almost all cases. And when you look at the other stations that we've brought forward for consultation, many do at exceed the minimum density, but in other cases, it'll be local area studies, secondary plans, individual development applications that will start to move the needle on bringing more and more density closer to these stations. So areas like Golden Mile, the Danforth planning study, we're seeing a lot of that local planning work underway, where they are looking at the capacity of infrastructure, the capacity of community services, all the different elements that are reviewed through secondary planning processes and local area studies to make sure that we have the ability to increase density to higher levels when we have where we are closer to transit. So we can go to the next slide. So this gives a little bit of a view of our progress to date. As I mentioned, about 130 draft major transit station areas have gone to Planning and Housing Committee, and we're currently consulting on those, including today's meeting and the series of open houses that we've been hosting over the last few weeks. As I mentioned, we've brought forward so far, I think it's 19 final protected major transit station areas, so 16 downtown, 2 at Keele Finch, and 1 at Keele and St. Clair. Those are awaiting ministerial approval. And beyond these stations, we have these 130 that are currently out for consultation. There are a few that we will require additional study, and those will be advancing later in 2023. But that biggest chunk, we're targeting the July 5th Planning and Housing Committee to bring forward and finalize most of those in order to get in place that key to unlock inclusionary zoning with protected major transit station areas in more than 80 additional major transit station areas. Next slide. So do want to encourage everyone to visit our MTSA interactive engagement tool, and I'll add the link into the chat once I finish talking. But you'll be able to find a link right on the Our Plan Toronto webpage. It's a little bit down, but the link is working. It's live, and it allows you to go online. You can go to the next slide. Scroll through all the background information. So a lot of the info terms, things that I've just said, you'll be able to read them again, understand them perhaps a little bit better. If you're a visual learner, you can see the maps, spend some time understanding the information and all the different terms, the different kinds of density that I've mentioned. If you continue to scroll down, you can go to the next slide. There is a taskbar on the left. You can put in the station name. So we have, as I mentioned, more than 130 stations that we're currently consulting on. They're all online. You can type in the name, or you can find them from the pick list. Next slide. And you'll be able to find local information and the information that we're using in the reports that we're taking forward to Planning and Housing Committee. So you can see the density, you can see the planned density, what the existing population or the 2016 census population was in those areas. So there will be a difference between the existing planning framework and the people that are there today. You can go to the next slide. And you can compare all the different densities as well. So the examples that's up on the screen is for base stations. So these are quite high numbers compared to much of the city, comparable to a lot of the downtown, but you can see what these different density numbers look like, what the estimated density is today versus what the planning framework would allow for if everything is built out. Next slide. And you can dig into the rest of the mapping data. So there are additional layers that you can turn on and off, take a look, get a better visual sense of how all of these pieces are fitting together. Next slide. And the background data. So all of it's available in chart form. You can look through it in this details section. It gives you all those numbers and how they compare to each other. And I believe, oh, and of course, sorry, you can submit your feedback. So that is what we're encouraging folks to do. You can give site-specific feedback. You can give more general feedback about the process generally, or looking at the different delineations and the densities. You can give station-specific feedback, and that will be extremely valuable for us as we try to finalize these ahead of July Planning and Housing Committee. So I do encourage everyone to take a look through if you're interested or have something to say about your local station or any stations across the city, and do encourage you to add your comments and your feedback to that. Next slide. And that's so yeah, back to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Josh. So we're going to go to a couple questions here on the material that you were just presented. So the first question we have here is, do you live or work near an identified MTSA? So the responses are, yes, I live near one, yes, I work near one, no, and I don't know. And if you don't know, you can always click on that MTSA tool to figure it out after the meeting and check all the information out. So many of you live near one of the MTSAs. So again, you can access this poll through menti.com and the code that's on the screen there. Okay, so we'll go to the next question. So this was the story map that Josh just walked you through. Have you used the MTSA story map on our website? So yes, no, I will after this meeting, or I don't know. So many of you are going to check it out after this meeting. That's great. Lots of information to figure out there and search through. And some of you have already checked it out. That's great. Okay, we have one more question, I think, in this section. So the minimum targets that Josh outlined there, the density targets for people and jobs, should the minimum targets be increased? So yes, no, and I don't know. Okay, so mixed response there. Some of you saying yes, some no, and some of you not so sure. Okay, well, thanks everyone for participating there.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. So I'm going to take you through one of the major components of another major component of the Our Plan Toronto work plan process, and it's about some draft employment policies that we've brought forward to committee and what are known as employment area conversions. And so I just want to start it off on the next slide with a statement that our employment areas are those 13% of the city that are that were colored purple, either core employment areas or general employment areas. And so, yeah, so they're the 13%, and these employment areas, this 13% of land mass across the city, serve a public interest. And what does that mean? It means a lot of things for us at city planning and our colleagues in economic development. As we look at our employment areas, again, the 13%, that we're applying an equity lens to review our analysis of these lands. And so with these lands, and with that statement that these lands serve a public interest, and how do they do that? They provide low barrier entry jobs for newcomers to Canada, those who face challenges having their professional credentials recognized in Canada, and individuals where English is not their first language. These areas of the city and the jobs they accommodate provide a living wage and employment opportunities in our communities, or varying communities across the city, some of which have really good access to transit. What we saw over the pandemic was some of our busiest surface routes were our bus routes on the arterials connecting neighborhoods out in Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke to their place of work that were providing what we now know as, and has always been, essential goods and services. These lands, again, the transit access is really important, and it's also important for businesses that they have access to major roads, access for goods movement in and out of their establishments, and they also provide to businesses what's called land use certainty, that these businesses can provide, the goods and services that they're providing, knowing full well that the lands around them may be protected from what are known as sensitive land uses or residential uses that may be negatively impacted by smelly, stinky uses or loud or vibration in order to manufacture whatever they're manufacturing, or the conflict with the trucks moving in and out of the employment areas. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the land use planning policy framework within which we work, the province also identifies what are known as provincially significant employment zones, and those are the green lands in the map to the left. So the province identifies these, and what we do in our official plan, we designate core employment areas and general employment areas. Again, those are our 13% purple lands, about 8,100 hectares across the city. And these lands do a lot of heavy lifting in that they accommodate over 400,000 jobs, which is a quarter of all the jobs in the entire city. And 92% of the manufacturing, industrial, and warehousing jobs found across the city are found in our 13% of our employment areas. Next slide, please. So I'll ask a member of my team to put the link to what I'm going to call the Hemson study. We retained a consultant named Hemson to look at our employment areas. So it was about a 1.5-year study, and they provided, I think it was 20 recommendations. And we can put the study link in the chat. And just to highlight a couple of the key recommendations from our consultants were that the city should be preserving lands near major goods movement and facility corridors. We should advocate for additional provincially significant employment zones from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the ministry themselves, and support office-focused employment, and a number of other evidence-based recommendations that they came up with. And on the next slide, some other key findings that Hemson provided to the city were, again, applying the equity lens and making sure that we're achieving the city's equity goals, particularly given the locations, the strategic locations of the employment areas near to some of the city's neighborhood improvement areas. Again, with good access to transit. And the NIAs, the neighborhood improvement areas, are those parts of the city that have experienced not enough investment in them. In terms of office, what Hemson and they were with they were working in conjunction with Cushman and Wakefield, another consultancy. Part of their recommendations to us was that it was too early for the city to determine the permanent effects of new office practices, and didn't recommend or recommended that the city not change our office requirements in the official plan at the moment, and that instead that we should be monitoring the return to work, the trends that they have, and track key office indicators closely before we make any policy changes. And an interesting finding that they had in their study was they calculated and tabulated the value of new industrial building permits within our employment areas. And so it's a key metric in that the value of building permits are calculated by the complexity of what's being proposed. And so over the last 20 odd years, annually, the new building permits within our employment areas annually, so every year, was about $48 million, the value of the permits. The value of the permit of addition and renovation permits averaged about $39 million per year for the last 20 years. And for structural and other permits averaged about $26 million per year. And so in short, what this metric tells us is that there is a level of confidence and a lot of private investment in our employment areas across the city, continually over the last 20 years. Next slide, please. So another finding that Hemson recommended to us, and we've created a new draft policy that we're consulting on, is the trend. Well, yes, the trend of e-commerce and our online shopping. And knowing full well that that e-commerce requires centrally situated sites across the city and needs good access to highways and major roads. So the picture here on the right is it's not the new Amazon fulfillment center in Northeast Scarborough, but it's what it's going to look like on our employment areas. And so the new policy in the official plan is to encourage a new multi-level industrial development, including last mile fulfillment centers, in order for them to be located near to us in the urban market so that we can get our overnight deliveries. Next slide, please. Another component that we're looking at through the Our Plan Toronto process is the principle of land use incompatibility. So the province also requires municipalities to prohibit residential uses within our employment areas. And in the official plan, we have about a dozen areas in the city that are designated employment areas, again, the 13%, but have an exception to the rule that allows residential. And what the province is telling us is that we can't have it both ways. You are either an employment area that prohibits residential, or you are not, where residential is permitted. So we're doing a deep dive on these 12 areas across the city that you can see there on the map generally. Our work continues on this, and we will be reporting, providing council an update in July with the final when they come back post our election in early 2023. Next slide, please. So employment area conversions, again, a big piece of work that members of my team are undertaking with our colleagues in economic development. So an employment conversion is the introduction of a non-permitted use into an employment area, such as residential. And so the province only allows these conversions to occur during what's known as the Municipal Comprehensive Review. We've just called it Our Plan Toronto. And so through this process, the city received over 140 of these conversion requests, and they require a very careful consideration for, from a citywide perspective, and then from a very site-specific perspective to make sure that, we're not creating land use incompatibilities. The province also sets out many tests that the city has to demonstrate prior to any conversions happening, and we also have citywide tests that we are also applying. So our 140 conversion requests across the city amount to about 685 hectares across the city, or 8.5% of all of our employment areas across the city. Next slide, please. In terms of process, members of my team have brought what we're calling preliminary assessments to Planning and Housing Committee. So basically, describing the conversion request. We've been conducting broad engagement, and this includes meeting with the proponent themselves, area businesses, stakeholders, and we've also undertaken sector-specific meetings with, for example, the food and beverage, institutional, manufacturing representatives as well. And the technical review is, like I mentioned, a very citywide analysis in addition to and including site and area specific due diligence. And of the 140 some odd conversion requests that we received, we'll be reporting on a subset of those to the July 5th Planning and Housing Committee. We won't be getting to them all in July by July 5, but we will get to the remainder of the ones that we don't get to in January or in early 2023 when council resumes for final reports. And I think I pass it back to you, Kristen.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And we are going to go to another Mentimeter poll. So bring out your smartphone or go to that desktop application where you can go to the next question. This is, again, kind of testing your knowledge and if you're paying attention to the presentation there. So you can select all that apply. Protecting employment areas will help with the following. So the options are jobs for newcomers, help provide living wage jobs, provide spaces for businesses, helps with Toronto's economic competitiveness, none of the above, or other. Okay. So we have most of you selecting probably all 4 of those options, which is what Jeff outlined in his presentation. So it helps with jobs for newcomers, helps provide living wage jobs, space for businesses, and with Toronto's economic competitiveness. But someone says none of the above, and there's another other. So whoever said other would love to know your thoughts, so you can add them to the chat.
Thanks, Kristen. So as Kristen mentioned in the lead up at the beginning, we at the city took the Municipal Comprehensive Review, again, the process that the province requires us to do. We took the opportunity to align some of the other city objectives, and one of them being Indigenous planning perspectives. Next slide, please. So in April of this year, a couple months ago, City Council unanimously adopted the Reconciliation Action Plan. And we believe there is a role for the official plan to help implement components of the Reconciliation Action Plan. And we know, as we acknowledge as planners, and we know that decolonizing our existing structures, processes, and ways of working have to acknowledge the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their worldviews with respect to land, sea, and water, land, sea, and air, because we understand that they are different from the colonial approach that we've been taking in guiding land use planning in Ontario in the past. And so we believe that the official plan has a role to play in furthering the city's adopted Reconciliation Action Plan. Next slide, please. And how do we do that? And how do we come to some of the draft words that we're consulting on? We engaged a number of treaty rights holders across the province. The city has advisory committees. The city has our own Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee with whom we've spoken. There's the Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council that we've also spoken to or engaged to better understand the challenges faced by urban Indigenous peoples in Toronto. And we've also done a lot of survey phone calls with a number of organizations operating in the city. Next slide. And so really quickly, an engagement process slide. So we, about last year, we consulted with the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, the AAAC, back in June to ask how best to amplify Indigenous voices in the Our Plan Toronto process. And so for 6, 7, 8 months, it was about listening, learning, and sharing, a process that we went through with the groups that we engaged. And it really was about relationship building to make sure that we were listening, we were learning, and in some instances, some First Nations wanted to learn more about Toronto. So there was a lot of back and forth. And then we spent the last couple of months reflecting on what we heard, drafting, and then even more reflecting. And it coincided with Council's adoption of the Reconciliation Action Plan. And so next week, or in 2 weeks, we go back to AAAC, the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, with the draft language I'm about to talk to you about. And we're going to continue our engagement with the treaty rights holders, other caretakers, and organizations across the city post-July, and hopefully come to a final report early in the new year. And so in the next slide, the Indigenous planning perspectives that we are proposing in the official plan is, first and foremost, they're recognizing the importance and the purpose of land use acknowledgements that we use to start city meetings, for example. These land acknowledgements shouldn't be, a form of pledge of allegiance. There is meaning behind them. There is, they are important because they help us, as settlers, immigrants, reflect on who was here before us and how we can do things differently in the future. We want the official plan to amplify Indigenous voices in the planning process. We need to deepen the city's understanding of contemporary urban Indigenous realities and experiences. And in doing so, how can we do that? We can identify opportunities for Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping and concrete initiatives in new development. And that the placemaking and placekeeping initiative is taken directly from the Reconciliation Action Plan. And in the official plan, we will be adding either a sidebar or some explanatory text on the Reconciliation Action Plan, so it can be embedded with, and we can use the chapter 1 of the official plan as a bit of a capacity builder section in the official plan to help Torontonians and those who use and read the official plan to be aware of and educated on some of these really important issues. Next slide, please. In terms of Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping, what these are outcomes, or the outcomes of placemaking and placekeeping initiatives are varied across the city and are critical to the city's health. Are critical for the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. So they are integral to reconciliation and justice. It helps creates and nurtures space for Indigenous processes, policy for ceremony, teaching, and community. What we learned is that the outcomes of placemaking and placekeeping help strengthen Indigenous connections with lands and waters, and for us settlers and immigrants, it helps build cultural competency and capacity building for land-based Indigenous engagement as well. Next slide. So really quickly, our next steps, as I mentioned, we'll go back to AAAC, the Toronto's Aboriginal Affairs and Advisory Committee, with the draft that I just spoke about, and we can put a link of the draft language that we've recommended to Planning and Housing Committee. So there's draft ideas that we're consulting on. Again, like I mentioned, we'll continue our engagement and prepare a final report early in 2023. Kristen, back to you.
Okay, thank you. And we will go to another Mentimeter question. So get out your smartphone or on your desktop, and we do have a question here. Are you familiar with the city's Reconciliation Action Plan recently adopted by City Council? So yes, no, and I will look at it after the meeting. So many of you are going to check it out after the meeting, and it is in the chat now. So you can click on it there. So some of you have already checked it out, but that's great. Okay, thanks everyone.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So as I mentioned, we've drafted some vision statements and components of them and directions for a revised and new Chapter 1 in the official plan. And again, our plan horizon is 2051, and this is about how we want the city to grow. And Chapter 1 kind of sets the stage for that. On the next slide is kind of just our core visual that has many different components that I'll talk about. But we'll dissect what this image is trying to tell you. So in this slide, our 2051 vision statement, again, this will be included into the official plan after the Indigenous Planning Perspective section. So we're stating that the official plan should seek to eliminate disparities experienced by Torontonians. The official plan should prioritize climate action and sustainability towards net zero by 2040, and the official plan should be the roadmap for Toronto to become the most inclusive city in the world. And I can go through each of these really briefly. So the first part of our vision statement about eliminating disparities, and what does it mean? What does this mean? So this is, the statement is about acknowledging that the post-pandemic recovery and rebuild needs to acknowledge that people had varied lived experiences across the city. For example, I had the privilege to go to work from home during the height of COVID, whereas I've had family members that needed to take transit to get to their their essential work. This also means the acknowledgement of the systemic effects of our land use planning, whether it be gentrification, income and racial segregation, limits to opportunities. We need to challenge these, and we need to look for outcome-based directions that meaningfully work to reduce disparity and build up social cohesion as well. This also means, but like the statement of eliminating disparities means about building complete communities that offer opportunities for people of all ages and all abilities to conveniently access most of the necessities for daily life, including a mix of jobs, local stores, services, a full range of housing, including affordable, active transportation options, which we talked about today, and necessary community services. The next component of our vision statement on the next slide is about prioritizing climate action and sustainability towards net zero by 2040. So we at the city are prioritizing climate change. We know that climate change is one of the biggest challenges facing our planet. And so our land use decisions should work towards achieving sustainability towards net zero by 2040. and applying the Indigenous planning perspectives to this part of our vision statement is that it's also about prioritizing the, again, like I mentioned, the Indigenous worldviews and relational views of land protection, especially around resiliency. And the third component of our vision statement is that the OP, the official plan, should be the roadmap for Toronto to become the most inclusive world in the city. The most inclusive city in the world. And so we know that development will continue to occur across the city, and we want to make sure that we're creating an inclusive city as more and more people choose Toronto as their home. And so trying to become the most inclusive city is part of our goal of how we want to grow. So we know we're going to grow by at least, again, a minimum of 700,000 people by 2051, and Toronto often exceeds the provincial forecasts that they set for us. And we also know that the federal government has set higher immigration rates into Canada, and we also know year over year Toronto has always been a very, very attractive place for immigrants to settle into. So we want a Toronto that is that is welcoming to newcomers. And how do we get there? In the next slide. So we will be adding, or we're proposing to add, these draft principles for a successful and inclusive city. And these three principles are about access, equity, and inclusion. So building a successful city requires these three principles to be applied. So when we talk about access, it's about improving access to, again, many facets of daily life. It's access to affordable housing. It's access to transit, good, frequent transit, reliable transit. It's universal accessibility for those living with physical disabilities. It's about an employer's access to a labor pool as well. In terms of equity, and when we use the term applying an equity lens, what that means to us is identifying and removing barriers for the city's most marginalized and vulnerable communities for achieving growth and positive and inclusive growth across the city. And in terms of inclusion, it's going back to making sure that we're creating a safe and inclusive city for today's Torontonians and for us living here today and those yet to arrive. So those, are our three principles for a successful and inclusive city. And on the next slide, I pass it back to you, Kristen.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And there were a couple of questions in the chat about needing clarification on eliminating disparities and being inclusive, but I think Jenny has responded to that in the chat. So we will go to our last polling questions for this evening. It's just to get your feedback on what you just saw presented. So the official plan vision, which was eliminate disparities, prioritizing climate action, and being the most inclusive city. So on those three goals, where do you strongly disagree or strongly agree or somewhere in between? Okay, so you can enter your thoughts into the Mentimeter poll. So seeing some in between the 4.2, 4.3 range. And if there is feedback on any of this, you can put that in the chat as well of if you felt like something was missing or needs to be explained further, please add that to the chat. Okay. So the next question is about how supportive are you of the official plan principles? So those were access, equity, and inclusion. Okay, so again, you can rank on the scale between strongly disagree and strongly agree on the 3 principles of access, equity, and inclusion. Okay, so we're seeing anywhere between 4.7 and 4.2. That's around the agree to strongly agree. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your participation in these polls tonight.
Sure. Am I off mute?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. So wrap up next step. So yesterday, Planning and Housing Committee considered draft policies on environment and climate change, and they adopted those. And those are going to move forward to City Council. I think it's next week, City Council, or the week after, for adoption. And then it goes up for ministerial approval. And as I mentioned, July 5th a couple times today. On July 5th, Planning and Housing Committee will be considering final recommendation on most major transit station areas and protected major transit station areas, as well as a final report on the employment policies that I talked about, as well as final assessments for some of the conversion requests that we received. And then members of my team will continue our work. And early in 2023, when council resumes from their election hiatus, we will finalize the or bring forward final reports on the remaining major transit station areas, a final report on the remaining conversion requests that we haven't yet reported on, and then also a final report on the draft official plan chapter 1, which will include Indigenous planning perspectives and the draft at the moment, the draft vision statement and directions that I also presented today. And so yeah, so there's more work to do. We will continue our engagement, so please do keep updated, and we will keep our website. We'll use our webpage as the basis of sharing information. And for those of you that I've gotten a couple emails about if we're going to share this presentation, yep, we'll post the presentation. The video, we'll also post the video component upon putting post captionings onto them, also onto our website. Kristen.
Okay, thanks. And so let's go to the next slide, and I'll give a couple highlights of what's still coming for the engagement. So we had a few meetings last week and already a meeting Monday, but tonight was the Toronto East York Town Hall. Then we have a statutory public open house on June 7th, and that's from 1 till 3 p.m. So just providing a variety of options for people. Then we have 3 kind of policy focused meetings that are going to be doing a bit of a deeper dig on these areas. So on June 21st, we have employment lands and the future of work. On June 22nd, we have neighborhoods and complete communities. And on June 23rd, we have housing and intensification. So if any of you are interested, I can tell from the comments and the questions that you are interested in some of these subjects. So hopefully you'll join us again for those meetings. But before we wrap up, just want to give a huge thank you for attending tonight and for your 2 hours of time. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all your really great questions and comments and all the chat and everything. So again, really appreciate it. Thanks. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.